Beyond the gates, spoilers reveal that, at Fairmont Crest, the most dangerous truths never arrive with noise. They do not crash through doors or announce themselves in public scandal. They begin in silence, in the private terror of a woman staring at a test result she never expected to see, in the tremor that runs through a hand trying to stay steady, in the terrible realization that one unanswered question can destroy everything more completely than any exposed affair ever could. Nicole had spent years mastering appearances, shaping herself into a woman who could survive disappointment with elegance and humiliation with restraint, but nothing had prepared her for the cold, suffocating fear of not knowing who the father of her child might be. That uncertainty did not simply threaten her peace. It threatened her dignity, her history, her future, and every fragile arrangement that had been holding her life together. What made it even worse was the timing, because this pregnancy did not emerge in a season of love or clarity. It appeared in the middle of emotional wreckage, blurred loyalties, and old wounds that had never healed properly. Somewhere beneath the polished routines of daily life, something had shifted, and now the consequences were taking shape inside her body before her mind had even caught up. In a world where everyone guarded image, bloodline, and legacy as if they were sacred, Nicole suddenly found herself carrying a secret that could tear through every layer of control the people around her had fought to preserve. The first days after her discovery felt unreal. Nicole moved through familiar spaces as though the walls had become unfamiliar, colder, narrower, less forgiving. Every room seemed to close in on her. Every reflective surface became an accusation. Her panic was not only about motherhood, nor was it simply about scandal. It was about memory. It was about the gaps, the emotional exhaustion, the blurred sequence of choices and compromises that now returned to haunt her with brutal force. She tried to reconstruct the past with the precision of someone searching for evidence in the ruins of her own life. Every encounter, every fragile moment of emotional weakness, every lapse in judgment suddenly seemed charged with new meaning. The more she searched for certainty, the more she realized that certainty might be the one thing she could never recover. That was the true source of her terror. Not merely that she was pregnant, but that her own body was carrying an answer her mind could not yet reach. Nicole's fear quickly hardened into defensiveness. She became sharper with everyone around her, less tolerant, less willing to be comforted. She could not bear the thought of pity. She especially could not bear the possibility that someone else might sense the depth of her uncertainty before she was ready to confess it to herself. The child growing inside her should have represented innocence, but instead it became entangled with guilt, calculation, and dread. She hated herself for thinking that way, hated the instinctive recoil she felt each time the question returned. Yet, the question would not leave her alone. It followed her into sleepless nights, into strained conversations, into the emptiness that came after moments when she pretended everything was still manageable. She was not simply afraid of the truth. She was afraid of what the truth would reveal about the woman she had become while trying so hard to survive everyone else's demands. At the center of that pressure stood Ted. Though even he did not fully understand how much damage had already been done, Ted had always preferred order over emotion, solutions over vulnerability, control over chaos. In the past, those instincts had made him appear dependable, even stabilizing. Now they began to harden into something far more unsettling. The possibility of losing his place in Nicole's life, or worse, discovering that another man's shadow had entered a story he still believed he could manage, awakened something dark inside him. Ted did not explode at first. He tightened. He observed. He became more attentive in all the wrong ways. He watched Nicole with the gaze of a man trying to solve a problem rather than understand a person. He listened not for her pain, but for inconsistencies. He convinced himself that if he could gather enough details, restore enough structure, and contain enough risk, he could force life back into something recognizable. But beneath that calm exterior was a rising obsession that had less to do with love than with possession. The pregnancy became, in his mind, not merely a private crisis, but a test of his authority over a reality that was slipping beyond his reach. That shift in Ted frightened Nicole more than she wanted to admit. She had known his need for order for years, but this was different. There was a new edge to him, a new intensity behind his restraint. His concern began to feel invasive. His help began to feel strategic. Every practical suggestion carried the weight of surveillance. He wanted timelines, context, medical details, emotional explanations, all arranged in a way that would allow him to reclaim the narrative. Nicole saw what he was doing and resented him for it, even as a part of her was tempted to surrender to the comfort of being handled. That inner contradiction tormented her. She did not trust him completely, yet she also feared facing the truth without him. She was angry that her vulnerability could be turned into an opportunity for someone else to exert power. The more Ted pressed for control, the more Nicole withdrew, and the more she withdrew, the more determined he became to break through her silence. What might once have been a painful but intimate reckoning began transforming into a power struggle shaped by fear, pride, and old resentments. As rumors and suspicions began to stir around them, the emotional walls separating private anguish from public fallout started to collapse. Nicole became hyper-aware of every glance, every pause, every change in tone from the people around her. She began to imagine judgment where there was none, and betrayal where there was only concern. But that paranoia was not entirely unfounded. In a world built on appearances, uncertainty was irresistible. The mystery surrounding the baby's paternity was not just a personal crisis. It was a weakness others could exploit. Even without open confrontation, Nicole could feel the subtle shift in the air, the sense that her life had entered a dangerous phase in which everyone might begin choosing sides before the facts had even surfaced. That possibility filled her with humiliation so intense, it sometimes felt like rage. She had spent so long trying to remain composed, so long trying to navigate emotional damage without letting it define her, and now the most intimate vulnerability of her life threatened to become the thing by which everyone measured her. The cruelty of the situation was that there was no clean moral ground left for anyone. Nicole was not innocent in the simplistic sense, but neither was she the villain her fear made her imagine. She was a woman cornered by the consequences of loneliness, confusion, and emotional need. Ted, for all his controlling instincts, was not untouched by pain either. His obsession grew from insecurity as much as arrogance. He sensed that something had slipped outside his influence, and that knowledge struck at the core of how he understood himself. He had built too much of his identity around being the one who could fix, protect, arrange, and contain. Faced with a reality he could not immediately command, he became harsher, more desperate, and more blind to the damage he was causing. The tragedy was not simply that Nicole was pregnant without certainty. It was that the people surrounding that pregnancy each began to project their own wounds onto it, turning an unborn child into the center of their unresolved wars. As Nicole's emotional state worsened, the idea of uncovering the father's identity stopped feeling like a path to freedom and started feeling like a sentence waiting to be announced. She delayed decisions she knew could not be delayed forever. She changed her mind repeatedly about who deserved the truth and when. Part of her wanted to know immediately, no matter how devastating the answer. Another part wanted to remain in the suspended agony of uncertainty because uncertainty, for all its cruelty, still allowed a few illusions to survive. Once the truth emerged, someone would be lost forever. A relationship would collapse beyond repair. A child would be tied to a history no one could rewrite. A future would be chosen not out of hope, but out of damage control. Nicole understood all of that, and the weight of it began to hollow her out from within. She was no longer simply frightened of scandal. She was grieving in advance for the life that would end the moment certainty arrived. That emotional fracture began to change her behavior in ways that shocked even those closest to her. She grew erratic in private, then icy in public. Small provocations drew disproportionate reactions. Moments that should have invited tenderness turned into silent battles for psychological ground. She started seeing every gesture through the lens of threat. Every offer of help seemed to hide a demand. Every apology sounded premature, as if others were already preparing for the version of her that would emerge after the truth. This was how loss began before anything had technically been lost. Nicole was mourning her self-respect, her stability, the fragile belief that she still knew the shape of her own life. What made it unbearable was that she had no one left to blame entirely. The pain was diffused across too many mistakes, too many emotional debts, too many choices made in moments when clarity had been impossible. Ted, meanwhile, drifted further into the dangerous comfort of strategy. Instead of meeting Nicole's fear with patience, he began constructing quiet plans, considering what would need to be done depending on the outcome, how reputations could be shielded, how damage could be reduced, how narratives could be guided before anyone else sees them. In his mind, this was responsibility. In truth, it was another form of panic. He could feel himself becoming someone colder, more calculating, but he justified it by telling himself that chaos required firmness. Yet the harder he tried to regain command, the more obvious it became that his need to control events was part of what had poisoned so much between them in the first place. He was not only trying to manage a crisis, he was trying to protect himself from humiliation, from displacement, from the unbearable possibility that he was no longer central in a story he once believed revolved around him. This is what made the search for the father's identity so destructive. It was never just an investigation into biology. It became a brutal excavation of motives, failures, and hidden emotional truths. Each new attempt to bring clarity only exposed more damage underneath. Nicole was forced to confront the loneliness that had made her vulnerable. Ted was forced to confront the controlling instinct that had made love feel conditional. The possibility of truth no longer promised resolution. It promised exposure. It promised that everyone would have to see themselves as they really were, stripped of their justifications and their polished self-images. By the time Nicole realized how deeply this pregnancy had changed the emotional balance around her, the old version of her life was already gone. The fear she first felt in silence had spread outward, infecting every relationship connected to her. The baby had become more than a child waiting to be born. It had become the living center of suspicion, longing, shame, and desperation. What should have been protected was instead contested. What should have been tender was made tactical. And in that transformation lay the true tragedy of the story. Not simply that a woman did not know who the father of her child was, but that the search for that answer began drawing out the ugliest instincts in everyone involved, forcing them into choices they would later struggle to forgive. In the end, the most haunting part of Nicole's ordeal was not the uncertainty itself, but what uncertainty revealed. It exposed how fragile dignity becomes when fear enters the body. It exposed how quickly care can turn into control, how easily love can be contaminated by pride, and how one hidden truth can force every buried weakness to the surface. Nicole stood at the center of that storm carrying more than a child. She was carrying the unbearable weight of consequence, and with every passing day, the question inside her grew heavier, more urgent, more merciless. Whoever the father turned out to be, the answer would not restore peace. It would only mark the moment when denial finally died, and everyone touched by this secret would have to step into the wreckage it left behind.